Let me start with a simple question. If someone asked you today to explain exactly how your organization handles personal data end to end, would you feel confident answering? Because with the DPDP Act now active, this is no longer theoretical. This is your compliance reality, and it applies to every enterprise in India today. Welcome to this complete walkthrough of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 and the DPDP Rules 2025, together called the DPDP Act. You're learning this with Z Cybersecurity. We help HR, IT, InfoSec, product, and legal teams across India make the DPDP Act practical, understandable, and usable through our alliance partner ecosystem. So think of this session as your clean, friendly DPDP Act briefing, with real enterprise examples every step of the way. Let's begin at the beginning, where this law came from and why 2025 changed everything. Background and context. The DPDP Act was enacted on August 11th, 2023, but for almost 2 years, it was just a framework. Everything became real on November 13th, 2025, when the government notified the DPDP Rules 2025. That's when the entire law switched from concept to operational, with timelines, procedures, enforcement, and clear DPDP Act obligations. This is the foundation of the DPDP Act. It protects your personal data as an individual, and it also recognizes your organization's need to process data responsibly. If you want a deeper explainer of how the DPDP Act evolved over time, you'll see an I button on your screen. Tap it to watch the full timeline breakdown. Now, let's meet the key actors in this whole ecosystem. Key actors under the DPDP Act. A data principal is the individual whose data is being processed. If someone is under 18, their parent or guardian becomes the decision maker. A data fiduciary, likely your organization, is fully accountable for why and how personal data is processed. A data processor is your vendor, HRMS tools, payroll software, CRMs, background verification agencies. Then you have the Data Protection Board of India, the enforcement authority that conducts inquiries and issues penalties. Consent managers are regulated intermediaries that let individuals manage consent across platforms. And finally, significant data fiduciaries, or SDFs. These are high-impact organizations handling large-scale or sensitive personal data, often using AI, biometrics, or profiling. If you want a deeper breakdown of these roles, especially SDF criteria, look for the I button on your screen that says DPDP Rules Explained. Now that you know who's involved, let's answer when the DPDP Act applies to you. The applicability of the DPDP Act. The DPDP Act applies to any processing of digital personal data within India, including data collected digitally, data collected offline and later digitized. Think of everyday examples: uploading joining forms into SAP, scanning visitor logs into a digital console, digitizing finance records with PAN numbers. And remember, the DPDP Act is extraterritorial. If a foreign SaaS vendor processes data of people in India, they are bound by DPDP Act rules. If you want a video that walks you through applicability with simple covered versus not covered scenarios, tap the I button on your screen now. Now let's look at where the DPDP Act does not apply. Exemptions under the DPDP Act. The DPDP Act does not apply to personal or domestic use, data someone themselves made public, data made public because the law required it. But here's the important nuance. Just because a piece of data is public doesn't give you permission to profile, scrape, or exploit it. If your HR or recruitment team scrapes LinkedIn to create internal culture fit scores, that can still violate DPDP Act rules. Public data does not mean free data. If you want a detailed video on when public data becomes risky under the DPDP Act, you'll see the I button on the screen for that. Now let's talk about timing, when each DPDP Act obligation actually begins. DPDP Act implementation timeline. The DPDP Act rollout happens in 3 major phases. November 13th, 2025, Rules 1, 2, and 1721 go live. Definitions, governance, DPBI setup. November 13th, 2026, Rule 4 activates. Consent managers become regulated entities. May 13th, 2027, all remaining DPDP Act rules activate. Notices, rights, security, breaches, retention, and SDF obligations. The staged rollout exists so organizations can prepare, but only if they start early. If you'd like a full DPDP Act readiness roadmap with dates and tasks, check the I button on your screen now. Let's move to one of the most important parts of the DPDP Act, lawful grounds for processing. Lawful grounds under the DPDP Act, there are only two legal grounds to process personal data under the DPDP Act. Consent, which must be free, specific, informed, unambiguous, unconditional, and given through clear affirmative action. 2, legitimate uses, which include employment purposes, legal obligations, state functions, and emergencies. In simple terms, payroll processing, legitimate use. Attendance logs, legitimate use. Marketing emails, consent required. Optional surveys, consent required. If you want a full deep dive on valid consent versus dark pattern consent designs, tap the I button on your screen. Let's talk about notices next, the backbone of DPDP Act compliance. Notices under the DPDP Act. Your notice must be independently understandable, in plain language, purpose-specific, itemized, and in the appropriate languages. And one rule stands out clearly. The ease of withdrawing consent must be comparable to giving it. If withdrawing consent requires a support ticket while giving consent takes one click, that's non-compliance. To see real examples of DPDP Act compliant notice design, look for the I button on your screen now. Now, with consent flowing from multiple channels, how do you manage consent at scale? That's where consent managers come in. Consent managers, Rule 4. Consent managers are regulated entities designed to give individuals a single, unified place to manage consent across platforms. They must avoid conflict of interest, act only in the user's best interest, store consent in a non-readable format, retain consent records for at least 7 years. If you're wondering whether your product or platform needs to integrate with consent managers, tap the I button on your screen for a dedicated explainer. Now, on to one of the biggest parts of the DPDP Act, data security. Security safeguards under the DPDP Act. Rule 6 requires you to implement reasonable security safeguards. This includes encryption or tokenization, strong access controls, monitoring and log reviews, backups and continuity, minimum 1-year log retention. These are not best practices. These are DPDP Act obligations. If you want detailed examples of technical safeguards used by enterprises today, look for the I button on your screen. But even the best security can fail. So what happens when there's a breach? Breach notification under the DPDP Act. A breach includes any unlawful access, unauthorized processing, or accidental compromise. When a breach happens, you must notify every affected individual, you must notify the DPBI, and you must submit a detailed report within 72 hours. Imagine your HR mailbox gets compromised and exposes salary slips and KYC documents. Even if you fix it quickly, you still need to notify employees and the board. If you want a ready-to-use breach response checklist, tap the I button on your screen. Next, how long can you keep personal data? Data retention and erasure. Under the DPDP Act, you must delete data when the purpose is fulfilled or consent is withdrawn, unless another law requires retention. Yeah, so if you want a practical guide to designing retention and deletion workflows, you'll see the I button on the screen. Now, let's move to one of the most compliance-heavy categories under the DPDP Act, significant data fiduciaries, SDFs. SDFs are designated based on volume and sensitivity, risk, use of AI, profiling, biometrics, national security relevance. SDF obligations include an India-based DPO, annual audits, annual DPIAs, reporting major findings, algorithmic due diligence, potential data localization conditions. If you want a full SDF explainer with real-world examples, tap the I button on your screen. Next, children's data. Children's data under the DPDP Act. A child is anyone under 18. Processing requires verifiable parental consent. Accepted methods include reliable identity data, DigiLocker tokens, voluntarily provided age information. And DPDP Act rules strictly prohibit tracking, behavioral monitoring, targeted advertising toward children. To learn how platforms handle child data safely, tap the I button you see now. Now, let's talk about cross-border transfers. Cross-border data transfers. Under the DPDP Act, transfers are allowed by default. They are restricted only when the government blacklists specific countries. SDFs may have additional localization requirements for certain categories of data. If you want a clear explanation of India's negative list model for data transfers, tap the I button on your screen now. Next, your users' and employees' rights. Data principal rights under the DPDP Act. Individuals have the right to access their data, correct or update it, complete incomplete data, erase data, and nominate someone to act on their behalf. These rights require proper workflows and system-wide coordination. If you want a workflow guide that explains how to respond to rights requests efficiently, tap the I button above. Now, let's cover grievance redressal. Grievance redressal. You must publish a grievance mechanism, respond within 90 days, allow internal resolution before escalation to the DPBI. If you want a ready-to-use template for a DPDP Act compliant privacy inbox, you'll see the I button on your screen. Finally, enforcement. Enforcement and penalties. Enforcement under the DPDP Act is digital only. Investigations are completed within 6 months, extendable by 3. Penalty buckets include 250 crore security failures, 200 crore breach or children's data violations, 150 crore SDF noncompliance, 50 crore user rights failures, and 10,000 data principal duty breaches. To see real scenarios of how these fines may apply, tap the I button that just appeared. Conclusion: the 5 pillars of the DPDP Act. The DPDP Act rests on 5 pillars: consent, rights, governance, accountability, security. And the message is clear. Begin your DPDP Act compliance program now, not at the final deadline. This video is part of our full DPDP Act Explainer Series. If you want deeper breakdowns on consent design, SDF rules, breach workflows, cross-border strategy, or children's data, click the I buttons throughout this video or browse the other videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.